Greetings and welcome to another video interview, HR Masters, Wine and Wisdom. I'm Michele, Synegal, one of your hosts today. And my colleague is Jody. You want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jody Friend, President and CEO of JLM HR Consulting. And we're delighted to be here today to talk with you. We have a special guest with us, Johanna Dolan. Hi, Johanna.
Hello, everybody.
And I'm going to ask if our special guest, Johanna, would introduce herself.
Right on. Hi, my name's Johanna Dolan. I am an LGBTQ educator. I'm also a member of the trans community as well as the gay community at large. I've been out for 30 years. So there we go.
Thank you so much for being here. It's nice to see you. It's been a while, and it's nice to just to get caught up and to know that you're still engaged and involved in advocacy for the transgender community. So I want to just frame our conversation today by starting out with, what's going on in the political scene. So during the 2021 legislative sessions, a number of states will consider legislation related to LGBTQ discrimination. Now, some of those bills will seek to advance the comprehensive non-discrimination laws that the LGBTQ community sorely needs, while other bills will almost certainly attempt to single out and target the LGBTQ people for unequal treatment. So we're going to be talking about, some of those laws, some of the bans, some of the laws that support, and then also, what it is that we can do as allies to be in solidarity with the transgender community. So my first question is to you. What should legislators take into consideration before enacting laws that ban rights such as healthcare? You want to start there? Why don't we start
there? Yeah. So I think the thing that legislators should consider and could consider is that the laws that we put on the books now are laws that will affect people for generations to come. We know that this is true. And we know that anytime we put a law on the books that is based in fear and mythology, that instead of science and progress, that it threatens people's lives. We know not only does it threaten people's lives from making certain that they can't get the healthcare that they need or the accommodations that they need, but it also threatens their lives from a public safety standpoint. And the reason I'm saying from a public safety standpoint is that, like this year alone, the statistics are like that there have been 41, I believe that's right, 41 Black trans women that have been murdered this year alone. And my number could be off because I looked at 2020's numbers too, so I apologize if it is.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, it's unfortunate that we are seeing just a rise in hate crimes just in general and in totality, and it's affecting different minority communities. So yes, that's really unfortunate. Jody, I'm going to throw it to you and ask you, what would you like to inquire of our guest today?
Yeah, so, Johanna, thank you once again for being here. We appreciate you coming to help educate us, because I think that is so important for of us that are in the field of human resources. We need to understand how we can best support our employees that may be considering or going through the process of a gender change, what are some things that as employers, HR professionals, can we do to support this community?
So I think there's a couple of things, right? The first one is to understand that not all trans people look the same, feel the same, or act the same, right? We're people. So if you come to us as people first, I think that that definitely supports us, right? Because it says you want to know me as an individual and that you want to make certain that I belong on your team. So there's that piece. And then there's also the piece that not everyone who's trans decides to transition. You know, while many people do transition, a lot of people don't transition. And so knowing that and having space made available for people to be exactly who they are, their most authentic selves at work, requires, you know, getting to know the people and to make certain that you have healthcare policies and procedures, as well as you have proper protocols about how you interact with people in the workplace. And then I think the last piece would be to be able to be exactly who you are. That requires letting people come out in their own way at their own pace, right? To be able to use, you know, to be able to use your name and your pronouns at work without fear of retribution is huge, right? And so what that means is that for people who have privilege, who are secure in that, you could consider adding your pronouns to the end of your email. And attach something along the lines of, you know, what does this mean, with a link to www.mypronouns.org, right? So that people can see it, they get to know it, they get used to it, and don't make it a requirement, right? Like, because it's like everything else, you know, like we want people to come to it on their own. And I think that the way that Michele answered or introduced me as an advocate is important to know, right? Like, I'm an advocate, I'm not an activist. And there's a very big difference, right? We have a tremendous need for activists. We also have a tremendous need for advocates. And the way that I see my role is that I'm the person that holds the door open, right? So that as many people as possible can come through. And then I let them know, here's what we know so far. We know that things are changing, and we know that as more and more people are able to walk through the door and we're able to get to know them, that the information and the way that people view themselves, we're able to see, right? And that also enables us to, from a scientific standpoint, to be able to say, what does the science say about this? You know, like, what is the biological and the psychological and the spiritual, as well as the social aspect of this come through? So I thought that I could share with you guys the Soji person. Is that a good time for this?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Excellent.
Okay, then let
Excellent.
me go
Thank
ahead
you for
and share.
that, Joanna. That is, thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you. So Soji is a really important concept to understand and to know, right? Soji is SOGIE. And really what it means is that sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. So it's a great way to just ask yourself, do I have all this information covered, right? So gender identity does not equal sexual orientation. It also doesn't equal sex or gender expression, right? So I'm just going to unpack it real quick. So gender identity is in our mind, right? It's our psychological sense of self. It's who we are with no one around. And it's also kind of who we are when we're interacting with others, right? So there's lots of different terms that fall under here: male, two-spirit, agender, genderless, female, genderqueer, gender fluid, and NB, which is another word for non-binary. And there's a lot of other words out there also for this, for gender identity, this psychological sense of self. So if someone is using a term that you don't know, it's absolutely okay to say, hey, what is that term? I've not heard that term before. What does that mean to you? Right. Then when we go down, we've got this picture of communication bubble, right? So pronouns, we use pronouns to say a lot of different things, right? But really what we're talking about here is respectful communication. Respectful communication shows up not only in our pronouns, like what we've got listed here, he, him, his, she, her, hers, they, them, theirs, whether it's their name or something else, or it also shows up with our titles, right? It shows up with whether someone is comfortable with Miss or Mix, whether they are comfortable with Reverend or Doctor or Mr., respectful communication. And normally it's a function of saying like, hey, this is how I like to be respectfully, this is what I consider to be respectful communication. What do you consider to be respectful communication? Because everybody's different about this. And then if you look down where the heart is, like sexual orientation, right? So sexual orientation is different too, right? Like we used to think it was just binary, like everything else, where you've got heterosexuality and homosexuality on either end. And we know that this isn't true, right? So there's actually multiple types of attraction, right? You've got romantic and you've got erotic attraction to men, women, or multiple genders. And because it's it's so diverse, we also have different names, right? So asexual, demisexual, pansexual, bisexual, lesbian, gay, and queer, right? And queer is an interesting word too, right? Because the LGBTQ, it's another space where you have to ask someone, what do you mean, right? So the Q could stand for queer, or it could stand for questioning. And you really have to ask someone, if they're using the Q, what does the Q mean to you? And also another thing to ask is, like, is it okay if you don't identify as queer, if you don't identify as part of the LGBTQ community, is it okay if I use the term queer? Because for some of us, queer was a word that was used before the violence started. I'm old enough to know that, and I come from an area of the country where, people use that word and then the violence started. And, so I still cringe at it, even though it's more often used, right? And also, like people use the term questioning because this is a lot to unpack. And once you start to unpack it, and once you start to understand that we're not like in this little box that once we thought we were, it changes things, and people have this experience, right? So then if we go down a little bit further, you can see the assigned sex is pointing towards the sex symbol, right? And instead of putting it at someone's genitals, we put it kind of in the middle of the person. And the reason we put it in the middle of the person is because assigned sex, biological sex really, is a lot more than just what you can see. We know that, yes, we have male and female, and we also have intersex. And intersex is a combination of what we can see and what we can't see, as are male and female, right? That includes our anatomy, both internal and external, our chromosomes, our hormones, and now we're starting to see like it's actually how our brain works. And gender expression, right? So gender expression is pointing at the little person there. And this is our overall communication or perception of gender. And there's lots of ways to do this too, right? Like there's the norm, there's what we consider the normal, right? And see, like, even as an educator, you got to catch yourself sometimes, So there's this overall communication of how we do gender, how we are with our gender. So, we've got masculine and feminine, and then we've got all these other things in between, right? Gender neutral, gender variant. Like some people identify as, a butch, and some people identify as femme. And really that identification is about how they express themselves and the energy that they bring to the table, right? And you can see one more down is two big words, right? When it comes to gender identity and biological sex. And this is the way that they interplay with each other, right? So cisgender is when your biological sex aligns with your gender identity. Transgender, on the other hand, is when your biological sex does not align with your gender identity. And both of those terms mean positive things. It's just a way of communicating gender and biological sex and our gender expression without alienating people. So it's a way to be more inclusive.
That was quite an education, Johanna. Thank you for that. And I'm sure, like many of, like myself and many of those watching will have lots more questions. And so I think, when we are, getting towards the end of our session here, perhaps we share some links to some websites that people can go to and learn on their own and become more familiar with some of the terms and things like that. So thank you so much for educating us today.
Yeah, and they have to understand that, the language continues to evolve. And so what you learn today may not be what is current, even 6 months from now. So know that it's a journey, it's not a destination, and we can continue to learn. So I want to ask you a question, Johanna, about, right now, what's very topical, of course, is the ban on transgender youth in sports, and primarily it is adversely affecting young girls. So just what is your reaction to that and your thoughts about that?
So my reaction to that is probably like a lot of people. I was a student athlete, and I'm still an athlete, so my reaction to the ban is that this sets people up for failure in a lot of different ways. And the reason I say that is because if I'm engaged in a sport, and if I'm engaged in a sport, someone looking at my genitalia has nothing to do with how well I perform my sport. It has nothing to do with my passion about my sport. It has nothing to do about my ability to be a member of my team and support my team to victory, right? And so like, there's that piece. The other piece of this is that this is dangerous for women. This is dangerous for young girls, and so anything that requires that we take a look at someone's genitalia, that's traumatic. And that, like in my thoughts, my opinions on this is that I should never have to get naked in front of you. Unless you are my doctor, you are, my lover, or, like you're the coroner at the end of my life. There is no reason for me to get naked in front of you. And for someone who is not a doctor to be looking at someone else's genitalia for the purposes of deciding if that person is in fact biologically anything is outside of their realm of practice, their scope of understanding, and that should be banned. That's what we should be banning instead. The fact that like that seems to me to be an extremist type of activity, and we are against extremist activities in this country. Why would we consider making things law that objectify people's bodies, number one, and number two, that cause harm and cause damage? Because if you choose not to engage in that, allowing someone to objectify your body, then this is when hate crimes start to happen, because that will become public knowledge. And then you become a target. So I think this is one of the most dangerous things that we can do. I also say that this is also a place for hope, I think, right? Like, and the reason I think that this is a place for hope, even though it is dark right now, we know that it is always darkest before the dawn, right? And we also know that our country is founded on hope and optimism, not fear and hatred, right? And so, like, yeah, people have got to get the worst parts of themselves out, and in order for the best part of themselves to come forth. And we know that the statistics, like the Gallup polls, are saying that more people support transgender people, period, than are against them. We know that what is driving this seems to be fear. So maybe instead of allowing fear to rule the day, we could allow science, and we could allow support for people, and we could allow hope to rule the day. And we could explore, instead of trying to put people and things into boxes, definitions into boxes, when what you just said is true, Michele. Like, we know that this is evolving, and this is evolving because more and more of us are coming out. Not because more and more of us are suddenly becoming, but because more and more of us are allowing you to see who we are.
Yes, thank you for that. I appreciate that. So what can allies do to support the transgender community in active ways?
In active ways? I love that question. So I think one of the ways that allies can support transgender community and transgender people, period, right, is to educate yourself, right? Like, the Human Rights Campaign has a plethora of information about not just the transgender community and the trans experience. They also have a lot of information about sexual orientation and laws, as well as history, right? So I would say educate yourself. Don't make the person that just came out to you educate you, because they are starting this journey of learning who they are. And we need to give them the opportunity to be who they are, right? So support means that you start to understand the landscape, right? The other thing that you can do is, if you own a company, if you are an owner of a company, if you are an HR, if you are a healthcare provider, you could take a look at the Human Rights Campaign Corporate Equality Index, or their Healthcare Equality Index, the Municipal Equality Index, the State Equality Index, and start to take a look at what they are asking, what the things that they are looking for organizations, states, hospitals, etc., to have before they say you pass the bar, right? And start to get yourself ready to go through the equality indexing. And if you're ready, once you're ready, go ahead and submit to have someone come out and take a look at your organization and affirm you, right? So those two things for certain. And then just get to know the person in front of you. Like, it's like anything else. Like, it's not enough to say I have friends who are LGBT. What's even better, what is enough, is to say, let me introduce you to my friend Joey. Have Joey come to dinner at your house. Like, and be friends with each other above and beyond my sexual orientation, my gender identity, or my expression. Get to know what drives me, get to know what I'm excited about, get to know what I'm afraid of, and get to know my history, because that's really what we're doing at the end of the day, is we're making space for people to be authentic.
You know, one of the things that I really appreciate with
Oh, absolutely.
how diversity, equity, and inclusion has evolved, the models have changed, and the current model at its core is about belonging. And it's about every cohort having that sense of belonging to their community. I have every right, every entitlement to be my authentic self at work. So that's one of the good things in terms of the evolution. And I think it's an evolution of consciousness as well. As awareness is increasing, as you say, as more and more people become educated, because the fear is oftentimes the fear of the unknown. That if you replace the unknown with knowledge,
right.
with information, with data, with science, then it demystifies the topic, and it just allows people more to, as you say, just to get to know people as individuals. But if they're fearful, they're going to hold back and not do that.
Because at the end of the
Yeah.
day, we are all
Yeah.
human beings. Yeah. We're all
Yes.
individuals, you know, and just like you said, Johanna, you know, take the label off. You're a person. We're all people. So, you know, let's get to know one another as people. You know, so let's just take these labels off and look at each other as individual human beings. And
Yeah.
you know, I just, you know, this is again has been very enlightening, very educational for me personally. You know, I do have a small team. As Michele talks about diversity, equity, and inclusion, there is a certificate program underway right now that I've made it a mandate for my team to take. So it's not an option. And so, you know, in the work that we do on a day-to-day basis, you know, we need to be very mindful of our own biases. We all have them. But the more we educate ourselves, the more we try to understand, you know, the better practitioners and just the better people we're going to be. So, Johanna, I thank you so much again for, you know, being with us today. Any
you,
closing remarks, either from Johanna or Michele?
Well, actually, I have one closing question, and I think the reason I want to bring this question up, because it's important that we understand that, yes, there is a struggle in the GLBTQ community, as there's a struggle in any minority community for voice, for visibility, for equity, and for inclusion. So I'd like to leave on an up note, and that question is, so what is your favorite thing about being who you are in terms of how you identify?
Oh God, there's so many things. So the thing I like the most is that in order to become comfortable with myself, I had to learn, right? Like I had to go on this, in order for me to feel comfortable with who I am, I went on this magnificent journey, right? And part of my journey was about, you know, like learning where we belong in history and where we belong in spirituality and like our spiritual journey. And, you know, like, and then having this understanding of like what it means from a psychological and a scientific standpoint to be like attracted to women and to be, you know, someone that identifies as two spirit and, you know, like falls under the transgender umbrella, and, you know, what it means to like, you know, to go through all of that and have this experience, and then finally to come back home. And by home, I mean like inside my skin, and say, okay, so what does that mean for me? You know, and then once I have that experience of what that means for me, like, well, what does that mean for other people, right? So like, and what that's done for me is it's given me this opportunity to get to know myself and enjoy myself in a way that I think a lot of people don't, because we don't question. We're taught don't question.
Yeah.
you know, and also like it's given me this space to make room in my life and in my heart for other people that are also on similar journeys that don't happen to be LGBT, you know, that are other, you know, oppressed minorities. And to not only like make space in my home, in my heart, but like to be consciously aware, like I do have privileges,
Mhm.
you know, and to use the privilege that I have, no matter how big or small it is, to make certain that we all get to join the table, you know, and that's the thing that I like the most out of this.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. I want to thank you for your time. And as Jody said, we have learned a lot today, and we will continue to learn, and we will continue to stand in solidarity with you and with the transgender community. So thank you so much. And thank you all for tuning in for yet another conversation on HR Masters Wine and Wisdom. Signing off.